How's it going, everyone? I'm Jacob from Soccer Rehab, and in today's video I'm going to share my experience rehabbing from a medial ankle sprain, also known as a deltoid ligament sprain. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this ligament, it's on the inside of your ankle, and it's actually the same ligament Messi sprained a couple months back in the Copa America Final that kept him out for about 2 months. Here's a picture of his ankle afterwards if you haven't seen it yet. Pretty nasty. Thankfully, mine didn't swell up quite that much. Typically, ankle sprains will occur on the outside of the ankle, and in fact, only about 5% affect the inside or medial ankle. These ligaments are very strong, so it's usually a contact injury from another player, although interestingly, neither mine nor Messi's was. It's been about 2 weeks since I injured my ankle, and what happened was we were playing on a really rough field with a lot of holes, and as I was taking a free kick, my toes hit the ground right before I kicked the ball. I was about 30 or 35 yards out, so this was a full power shot. Based on the mechanism of injury, with the toes pointed down and out, and the location of pain, I most likely sprained the anterior or the front 2 parts of the deltoid ligament, the anterior tibio-talar and the tibio-navicular parts. Unfortunately, this was by far my worst ankle sprain ever. I was unable to play anymore after this, but I was able to walk with quite a bit of pain. Here's a picture from a couple days after the injury. I rarely ever swell or bruise from injuries, so I knew this was going to be a bad one. I haven't had a whole lot of ankle problems in the past, and typically I recover really fast from lateral ankle sprains or rolling my ankle. Because of that, I haven't really taken rehab all that seriously for these injuries in the past, but that's about to change for this one, and I'm going to show you how I will rehab it from start to finish. Because these injuries are fairly rare, there's very little research on the rehab aspect of this condition, so I wanted to share my experience, and I hope this helps some of you who are dealing with the same issue. One thing to note is that these ligaments take a lot more force to injure than the lateral ligaments or the outside ligaments, and as a result, the recovery tends to be a lot longer, potentially even twice as long. There can also be fractures or other injuries that happen at the same time, so if you're having severe pain or trouble walking, definitely go get it checked out. All right, let's get into it. So the first couple days after the injury, I was definitely limping quite a bit. Pushing off my toes was especially painful, as was walking on uneven ground. I didn't wear a brace at all, but in hindsight, probably should have. Oh well. I'm going to show you how limited my range of motion was. Going up into dorsiflexion was actually still pretty good compared to the other side. But as you can see, going down into plantar flexion was really limited and painful. Inversion, or moving my foot in, was also pretty good overall, but eversion, or moving my foot out, was very limited. I'm trying to do it here, but it's mostly just moving up. Combining the down and out movements together was by far the most painful and limited, which makes sense given that both of those movements are putting stretch on the ligaments. Palpation or pushing on this spot was also quite tender. I started these exercises a couple days after the injury, mostly just range of motion to start, beginning with gentle dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, then into inversion and eversion, toe range of motion, and ankle circles. I was also able to bike right away, which was good because running definitely wasn't happening. Then I started some seated heel and toe raises. I was able to add some resistance by pushing on my knees and then by holding myself up by my arms, but I was not able to come up very high on my toes due to pain. Here's a basic calf stretch, which I would try to hold for at least 30 seconds. And then towards the end of week 1, I was able to start small range heel raises. Again, not going up too high, as well as isometric holds with both legs and one leg. I was unable to squat in week 1 without pain. Okay, so moving on to week 2. Now I'm trying to work on range of motion more aggressively. First with a banded dorsiflexion mobilization. My dorsiflexion motion is actually not too bad. Next, I'm going to work on self-PA mobilizations, so from back to front, to improve my plantar flexion or toes down, which actually is still quite limited. This one shouldn't really be painful, but if it is, I would hold off for a little bit. I've also begun toe raises as well as heel raises with a band pulling my leg posterior. This is similar to the mobilization we just did, trying to help with plantar flexion. This did allow me to do these without pain, thankfully. I've also started working on inversion and eversion in weight bearing, and eversion has started to get a little bit easier now. I've also been dealing with some posterior ankle impingement symptoms, which typically arise from hyperplantar flexion, so pointing the toes down really far, which is exactly what happened when I kicked the ground. This impingement happens behind the ankle bone, so I've started a couple stretches to hit some of those deep toe flexor muscles. I'm going to strengthen those muscles as well to help with both the impingement and the ankle sprain. I'm able to start more ankle strengthening with a band now, beginning with dorsiflexion. I did have to limit how far down I could go, with plantar flexion still being an issue at this point. Eversion has been starting to improve as long as I don't go too far out. I also had to be a little careful to not go down too far with resisted inversion, as this is also stressing the ligament. And finally, I was able to start balancing on one leg, stationary at first, and then adding some movement and twisting to provide more of a challenge. I was able to do my first run right at 2 weeks, although this was a bit painful towards the end. I'm able to walk without pain for the most part now, thankfully. I do still have a bit of swelling and tenderness at that medial ankle area, but overall I'm fairly happy with the progress so far, but I know it's still probably going to be 3 to 6 more weeks before I can play soccer again. Stay tuned for the next video where I'll cover weeks 3 and 4, hopefully progressing the running and really ramping up the strengthening exercises.